Let's talk about Al-Qaeda. 9/11 was the first time that a lot of people had heard of them and their leader, Osama bin Laden.
There's only one group that has ever indicated that it has this kind of ability, and that's Osama bin Laden.
Nearly 3,000 people were killed, and overnight, Osama bin Laden became the world's most wanted man.
I want justice. There's an old poster out west, as I recall, that said, wanted, dead or alive.
It took 10 years for the US to track him down and kill him. But today, the group he created is still very much alive.
A very fearsome kind of organization, one that still has resilience.
So 20 years after 9/11, how has Al-Qaeda changed? What are they trying to achieve? And what could the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan mean for them? Al-Qaeda's been around since the late 1980s. US intelligence had their eye on them way before 9/11 because they'd been linked to several attacks, including a 1992 bombing at a hotel in Yemen, a truck bomb that blew up at the World Trade Center, simultaneous attacks on American embassies in Tanzania and Kenya, and the bombing of a US Navy destroyer. So what was driving Al-Qaeda? Well, to understand that, we have to understand Osama bin Laden. He was born in Saudi Arabia and came from a wealthy family that ran one of the biggest construction companies in the Middle East. In the 1980s, bin Laden went to Afghanistan to join the fight against the Soviet occupation. He styled himself as a devout Muslim who had a duty to defend other Muslims from a foreign occupying power. And in 1988, he established Al-Qaeda, using his millions to fund and recruit fighters for the cause. After the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan in 1989, bin Laden's mission shifted to focus on the US. And the first Gulf War was a catalyst. Iraq had invaded Kuwait, the US came to Kuwait's defense, and in the process stationed thousands of US soldiers in Saudi Arabia. And as with the Soviets in Afghanistan, bin Laden saw the US as a foreign power in Muslim lands.
There was a larger philosophy around bringing down the idea of the West touching any, quote, Muslim soil.
He felt that attacking the United States directly was important.
The question was, how would he do it? Well, by 1996, the Taliban had seized power in Afghanistan, and it became clear they would provide some kind of sanctuary for bin Laden to build up his group.
He had created a mini army of sorts in Afghanistan. He created these sprawling training camps in which he was training thousands of foreign fighters.
So the late 90s was a time that Al-Qaeda, tucked away in Afghanistan, was able to grow and plan attacks, including 9/11.
Somewhere tonight, terrorists are celebrating the apocalyptic destruction that has killed so many and forever changed America and its largest city.
The only question is, what would be, in American terms at least, proportionate retaliation for this type of event?
Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated.
That so-called war on terror led to the invasion of Afghanistan by the US and UK, with several other countries joining a bit later. President Bush also used it to justify the US invasion of Iraq in 2003, even though Iraq had no connection to 9/11. Over the next few years, many top members of Al-Qaeda were killed, mostly by US drone strikes, but Al-Qaeda was still a threat. And it was still able to attract new recruits for lots of reasons. One of them was the growth of the internet, which helped them spread their message further and faster. And it's been argued that abuses committed by the US and others in the name of the war on terror also ended up pushing more people towards them. Things like the torture at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq and the indefinite incarceration without charge or trial of hundreds of detainees at Guantanamo Bay.
The war on terror has been a major determinant of rising anger and even some desperation among hundreds of millions of citizens around the Middle East and South Asia. Ordinary citizens suddenly die because a missile comes out of the sky and kills them, and they know where this missile came from. And that breeds just incredible anger.
In the years after 9/11, there were more plots and attacks by Al-Qaeda and those they inspired. like the Bali bombing, the Madrid train attack, London 7/7, and the Charlie Hebdo shootings in Paris. But not all these happened under Osama bin Laden, because by 2011, he was dead. After a 10-year manhunt, the US found him and killed him in Pakistan.
We have cut off their head, and we will ultimately defeat them.
The killing of Osama bin Laden was a big blow to al-Qaeda. He was replaced by Ayman al-Zawahiri, an Egyptian who had been a top member of al-Qaeda since the late 90s. But he's no bin Laden.
He is someone who is seen as having almost no charisma. As a result, far less inspiring.
Seen, perceived as a pedantic uncle who goes on these long, rambling speeches.
There have been various reports of al-Zawahiri being killed, but most experts believe he's still alive, hiding out somewhere in Afghanistan with a $25 million bounty on his head. Al-Qaeda's leadership is under constant pressure from a huge international counterterrorism effort. It's made it harder for the group to plan attacks on the same scale as 9/11. But Al-Qaeda has adapted.
What it represents today is a resilient organization that has the capacity to bring in, like a magnet, other types of groups that kind of go with their narratives. They have staying power.
So Al-Qaeda now has a network of affiliates around the world. Aside from Afghanistan and Pakistan, there are groups in different parts of Africa, like Al-Shabaab in Somalia and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, in Algeria, Libya, and Tunisia. There's another group in Mali. In South Asia, it's been active in places like India and Bangladesh, and in the Middle East, Al-Qaeda has taken advantage of the chaos caused by wars in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, developing branches in all those countries. The one in Iraq actually split off and became ISIL. They became a big rival of Al-Qaeda's.
Al-Qaeda would very much like ISIS to sort of go away or to demobilize as quickly as possible.
But are Al-Qaeda about to get a boost? The Taliban has taken over Afghanistan again. And last time around, they helped Al-Qaeda. This time, they say it'll be different.
زموږ اجازه نه ورکو چې د افغانستان خاوره د گاونډیو او یا د نورو ملکونو په ضد استعمال سي او یا دغه په خلاف استعمال سي. په دې اړه غواړو چې ټول نړیوال مطمئن اوسيږي، ډاډه اوسيږي، اسلامي امارت خپل ژمنو ته متعهد ده.
But can the Taliban be trusted when it comes to Al-Qaeda?
The Taliban made similar commitments in the pre-9/11 era as well. We now know that the US government approached the Taliban around 30 times, asking them to do something about bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, to not host Al-Qaeda. And still 9/11 happened. Even now, they're not coming clean on the current status of their relationship with Al-Qaeda.
Some people, though, would argue that Al-Qaeda's biggest weapon has always been and continues to be something more powerful and elusive than men with guns.
He unleashed a ripple effect that impacted the way societies think about themselves. Today, 20 years afterwards, this us versus them has exploded in a way that we couldn't have imagined.
But actions by the US and its allies since 9/11 have also created a ripple effect.
If you talk to a poor farmer in rural Yemen or Pakistan or Syria whose house was destroyed and 10 members of his family were killed by a drone fired by the US or foreign groups fighting the terror groups, the legacy of bin Laden and Al-Qaeda will be a positive one. People say, well, somebody stood up for us. Somebody tried to fight back.
Many of the ideas that bin Laden put forward are much more mainstream than they were 20 years ago. And one of the most important is the idea that the West is at war with the Muslim world.
And now that the last US soldier has left Afghanistan, the Taliban are celebrating what they see as a victory in that war. And so it would seem are Al-Qaeda.
Al-Qaeda's ecosystem in particular are electrified by the return of the Taliban, by the fact that the Taliban has prevailed against the United States. They see it as their own victory because they have supported, they've seen the Taliban's insurgency against the US as a key component of their platform.
20 years after 9/11, the world has changed and Al-Qaeda has changed. But after all this time, the question of what Al-Qaeda might do next is probably as important as it ever was.